My neighbor lost her husband and knocked on my door the next day. The neighborhood was usually quiet. Most people left early in the morning and came back late in the evening. Doors stayed closed, and everyone minded their own life. He had lived there for years, long enough to know the small details, who parked where, who walked their dog at night, and who kept their lights on too late. But he never truly knew his neighbors. The house next to his always felt calm. A young, beautiful woman lived there with her husband. They didn't talk much, just small greetings now and then. A nod. A polite smile. Nothing more. From the outside, they looked like a normal couple, living a normal life. No noise. No drama. Breath. Just two people sharing the same roof. Then one evening, everything changed. He noticed an ambulance parked outside her house. The flashing lights cut through the quiet street. Neighbors slowly stepped outside, whispering to each other, trying to understand what was happening. No one knew the details, but everyone felt something was wrong. After a while, the ambulance left. The lights disappeared, but the heavy feeling stayed. The next day, the truth spread quietly. Her husband was gone. Just like that. One moment he was alive, and the next he wasn't. There were no long explanations, no dramatic scenes. Just a simple, painful reality. After that day, her house felt different. The curtains stayed closed. Brass. The lights were off even at night. No visitors came. But no sounds came from inside. It was like the house itself was holding its breath. When he passed by her door, he slowed down without realizing it. Not out of curiosity, but out of concern. He wondered how someone could suddenly face such emptiness. Days passed. The street went back to normal, but her silence didn't. He saw her once, early in the morning. She stood near her door, holding her phone, staring at the ground. Her face looked tired. Not just tired from lack of sleep, but tired in a deeper way. Like life had suddenly become too heavy. Rasp. He wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. So he just nodded, and she nodded back. That night, he couldn't sleep well. His mind kept returning to the same thought, how fragile life really was. One day, everything feels stable, and the next day, it's gone. No warning. No time to prepare. The morning came quietly. He was making tea when he heard a sound that felt out of place. A knock. Wasn't loud. It wasn't rushed. Just a soft knock on the door. At first, he thought he imagined it, but then it came again. Slow. Break. Careful. Almost unsure. When he opened the door, he froze for a moment. She stood there. Her eyes looked red, like she hadn't slept much. Her shoulders were tense. Baha'i. She held her hands together as if she didn't know what to do with them. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said quietly. Her voice was low, almost breaking. I didn't know where else to go." He stepped aside without thinking and let her in. Inside, the room felt warmer, safer. She sat on the edge of the chair, not relaxing at all. He offered her water, and she accepted it with shaking hands. She took a small sip and stared at the glass. "I don't need much," she said. "I just didn't want to be alone today." Those words stayed in the air. He realized then that this knock wasn't random. It wasn't planned. It was a moment where pain became too heavy to carry alone. They sat there in silence for a while. No pressure. Desperate, no questions. Just two people sharing the same space. Psst. Outside, life went on as usual, but inside that room, time felt slower. And without either of them knowing it, that quiet morning became the beginning of something neither had expected. Fast. After that morning, something subtle changed. They didn't suddenly become close, and nothing dramatic happened, but the silence between them felt less heavy. The next day, she didn't knock again, but when they crossed paths outside, she gave a small smile. It wasn't happy, it was grateful. A few days later, she knocked once more. This time, her hands were steadier. Bah. Her voice was still soft, but not as fragile. She asked if she could sit for a while. He said yes, without hesitation. They talked a little. Nothing deep at first. Simple things. The weather. The noise from the street. Small words that filled the space without pressure. Then, slowly, the conversation shifted. She spoke about her days now, how mornings felt strange, round, how the house felt too big, how silence followed her from room to room. But she didn't cry much while talking. Her pain came out in pauses, in the way she looked away, in the way she breathed before finishing a sentence. He listened. Sometimes he wanted to say something comforting, something wise, but he realized listening was enough. She didn't need advice. She needed to be heard. Over the next week, these quiet visits became normal. Not every day, but often enough to matter. She would sit, hold her cup, and talk. Sometimes about memories. Sometimes about nothing at all. He noticed how she avoided speaking about the future. Her world seemed to exist only in the present moment. One evening she said something that stayed with him. "I don't miss the noise," she said. "I miss the feeling that someone was there." That sentence explained everything. Bration. She wasn't searching for love. She wasn't replacing anyone. Breeze. She was simply trying to survive the sudden emptiness. And he understood that more than he expected. Outside, people whispered. Neighbors noticed her coming and going. Quiet looks followed them. But inside the room, none of that mattered. But what mattered was the calm they found in shared silence. There were moments when the weight of reality returned. She would suddenly grow quiet, lost in thought. He learned not to interrupt those moments. He learned that grief didn't follow rules or schedules. One afternoon, she stood near the door before leaving and said, "Thank you for not asking too many questions." He replied honestly, "Thank you for trusting me enough to knock. That was the truth." They didn't promise anything to each other. There were no big talks about what this meant. They both understood the line between comfort and confusion, and neither wanted to cross it. What they shared was simple, human. Deuce. Two lives briefly connected during a painful chapter, and slowly, very slowly, she began to stand a little taller. Her voice gained strength. The shadows in her eyes softened, though they never fully disappeared. The knock on the door no longer felt like a cry for help. It felt like a reminder that even in loss, kindness can still find its way in. And sometimes that's enough to keep going. As days turned into weeks, their quiet routine settled in naturally. There was no fixed time and no promise. Sometimes she would knock in the morning, sometimes in the evening. Sometimes she wouldn't come at all. And that was okay. There was no pressure from either side. He noticed small changes in her. She began to dress a little neater. Her eyes, though still carrying sadness, no longer looked completely lost. She spoke more freely now, not just about the present, but about the past. About how life once felt full without her even realizing it. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the window, she spoke about her marriage for the first time in detail. Not the perfect moments people like to share, but the real ones. The small arguments, the quiet dinners, the unfinished plans. She talked about how they often said they would do things someday, thinking time was endless. Her voice didn't shake much, but her hands did. "I always thought there would be more time," she said softly. Now I understand how wrong that was. He listened, feeling the weight of her words settle in his own chest. He realized grief wasn't only about losing someone. It was also about losing the future you imagined. Sometimes their conversations were light. They talked about food, about old movies, about simple memories from childhood. Those moments felt like short breaks from reality, destiny, small islands of calm in a sea of heavy thoughts. But there were also days when she arrived quieter than usual. On those days, she didn't talk much. She would sit, stare at the floor, and breathe slowly. He learned that silence was also a language. He learned not to rush it. One afternoon, as she stood by the window, she asked a question that surprised him. "Do you ever feel like life is just fragile?" she asked. He nodded. "More than I used to." That was all that needed to be said. He also began to change, though he didn't notice it at first. He became more aware of people around him, more patient, more present. Her loss had quietly reminded him that nothing should be taken for granted. But along with comfort came confusion. Sometimes, when she laughed softly at something he said, he felt a strange warmth. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't desire. It was something gentler, mixed with concern and care, and that made him uncomfortable. Not because it felt wrong, but because it felt complicated. He knew she wasn't ready for anything new, and he knew he didn't want to be a reason for more pain. That awareness kept him grounded. Outside, the neighborhood watched quietly. Some people smiled politely. Aspiration. Some whispered. He noticed the looks when she left his house. He didn't blame them. People always try to explain things they didn't understand. One evening she addressed it herself. "I know people talk," she said, her voice calm but tired. "I just want you to know this helps me breathe again. Nothing more." He met her eyes and replied honestly, "I understand." That honesty became their strongest foundation. She started spending more time in her own home again. She talked about cleaning rooms she had avoided, about opening windows she had kept closed. Those were small victories, but they mattered. One day as she prepared to leave, she paused and said, "You didn't try to fix me. That means more than you know." He watched her walk back to her house, realizing that sometimes support doesn't mean holding on. Sometimes it means letting someone stand on their own again. But though neither of them said it out loud, they both knew this chapter was slowly changing. The shift was gentle, but it was real. She began coming less often, not because she didn't need him anymore, but because she was learning to carry her days on her own. He felt proud of her, even though a small part of him felt the quiet return. One afternoon, she knocked after several days of absence. Her face looked calmer, but her eyes held something new, uncertainty. They sat down, and for a while, neither spoke. Ray. Finally, she broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, "about us, about how this might look to others, and about what it means to me." He listened carefully. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she continued. "Not you. Not myself. And not the memory I carry." Her honesty was heavy but necessary. He nodded slowly. "I don't want that either." That conversation marked a turning point. Not an ending, but a clearer understanding. They both accepted that what they shared was not meant to turn into something else. It was meant to be what it already was, a safe place during a storm. The neighborhood noise grew louder. Rumors became bolder. She felt it when people looked away or whispered. It hurt, but it also strengthened her resolve. "I don't need approval," she said one day. "I just need peace." And peace, slowly, began to find her. She started meeting other people again. Family members visited. Friends stopped by. Her world, once empty, began to fill in small ways. He noticed that her laughter sounded different now, lighter, more natural. There was a day when she didn't knock at all, and then another. At first he wondered if something was wrong. Then he realized something important. She was living again. When she finally came back, it wasn't out of need. It was out of choice. She stood at the door and smiled. "I wanted to say thank you properly," she said. They talked that day not about grief, but about growth. About how pain changes people, but doesn't have to define them forever. "I was afraid of being alone," she admitted. "Now I'm learning how to be okay with it." He respected that deeply. As time passed, their meetings became occasional, friendly, and warm. The weight was gone. What remained was mutual respect and quiet understanding. Breath. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the streetlights came on, she said her goodbye. "Whatever happens next," she said, "I'll always remember this time." "Bah, you helped me stand when I couldn't," he replied simply. "You did the hard part yourself." She nodded, eyes full but steady, and walked back to her home. He closed the door gently and stood for a moment in silence. Life outside continued as usual. Cars passed. Lights flickered on. The world moved forward, and he realized something important. Sometimes people come into our lives not to stay forever, but to help us survive a moment that feels impossible. And that, in its own quiet way, is enough. The weeks after that goodbye felt different. Not empty, but quieter in a new way. He noticed the silence again, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt calm, like the kind of quiet that comes after a long storm, when the air feels cleaner and easier to breathe. He still saw her around. Sometimes in the morning, stepping outside with a cup in her hand, sometimes in the evening watering the plants near her door. She looked more present now, more steady. The sadness hadn't vanished, but it no longer controlled her every move. They spoke less, but when they did, it felt natural. No tension, no confusion. Just two people who understood something deep about each other without needing to explain it again. One afternoon, they crossed paths by chance near the gate. She smiled first. "I've started rearranging the house," she said. Desperating. Slowly. One room at a time. "That sounds good," he replied. "It takes courage." She nodded. "It does. Some days are still hard, but now I know I can get through them." But that simple sentence meant more than any long conversation they had shared before. Life continued to move forward. He returned fully to his routines. Work, errands, evenings spent with his thoughts. But something inside him had changed. He no longer rushed through days without noticing them. The small things. To small things. To moments that might have once felt ordinary. He realized that being there for her had taught him something important about himself. Breaths. About patience. About listening. About how powerful it can be to simply stay when someone is hurting. There were days when he wondered if she missed those early mornings, the quiet talks, the shared silence, but he never asked. Some questions didn't need answers. One evening, months later, there was another knock. It surprised him. When he opened the door, she stood there holding a small box. Her expression was calm, her posture confident. "I won't stay long," she said. "I just wanted to give you this." He looked at the box, unsure. "It's nothing big," she added. "Just something to say thank you." Inside was a simple item. Nothing expensive, nothing dramatic. Boast. Just something thoughtful, chosen with care. The kind of gift that carried meaning, not value. "I didn't know how else to say it," she continued. "You didn't try to change my pain. You just respected it." Breath. "That helped me heal more than you realize." He felt a tightness in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm glad you're doing better." "I am," she said softly, "but better." They stood there for a moment, neither in a hurry to end the conversation. "I might be leaving soon," she said. "Not far, just somewhere new. A fresh start." He nodded, understanding immediately. "I hope it brings you peace."
"I think it will," she replied. "I'm finally ready." When she turned to leave, she paused.
"Take care," she said. "You too," he answered. And then she was gone, walking back to her house, not looking back. The day she moved, the street felt strange again. Breath. Trucks came and went. Boxes were carried out. Doors opened and closed. Neighbors watched quietly. By evening, her house stood empty, windows reflecting the fading light. He stood at his own door and watched for a while. He didn't feel sad. He felt grateful. Grateful that she had knocked when she did. Grateful that he had opened the door. Grateful that two strangers had shared a moment in time that mattered. In the days that followed, he often thought about how close people can come into our lives without staying forever. How some connections are not meant to last, but are still important. He realized that real life doesn't always end with clear answers or perfect endings, but sometimes it ends with understanding, with acceptance, with quiet growth. Months passed, but seasons changed. New faces appeared in the neighborhood. Life kept moving, as it always does. But every now and then, when he heard a knock at the door, he paused for a second longer than usual. Not because he expected her to be there, but because that knock had once changed something inside him. It reminded him that kindness matters, that presence matters, that even brief connections can leave lasting marks. And though her house remained empty for a long time, the memory of that chapter stayed alive. Pain. Not as pain. Not as regret. But as proof that during one of the hardest moments in her life, she didn't have to face it completely alone. Sometimes, that is the truest kind of human connection. Not forever, just enough